Hello and welcome back to our final day of Zoology Live from the Museum of Zoology. Now, yesterday we saw how our research assistant Matt Hayes has been setting a moth trap in his back garden. Here's a short film showing you how he did it, and then we'll be joined live by Matt after the film, where he'll be showing the results of his moth trapping and answering your questions.
To see the moths that live around me, I made a cheap bucket moth trap following instructions from Butterfly Conservation. The base is a deep bucket with small holes in the bottom to allow rain to drain out. Then I place egg boxes inside for the moths to hide under when they fall in the trap. The last section is the bucket lid, which has a large funnel inserted inside it and a UV reptile lamp attached on top inside a water bottle to keep out the rain. The moths get attracted to the light, hit the bottle, and fall down the funnel into the bucket. Then simply plug in the light and switch it on as it gets dark. The moths will be there in the morning, safe and sound for you to observe and release them. This moth trap is really simple. All you will need is a white sheet and a torch. Hang up the sheet in your garden or drape it over a piece of furniture. Then, as it gets dark, shine your torch on it and sit back and wait to see which moths get attracted to the light.
And now we're joined live by Matt, who's going to show us some of the results of his moth trapping and answer your questions.
Hi everyone, so my name's Matt and I normally study butterflies, so I'm pretty new to moths, but I wanted to show you what someone with not much experience could find in their budget moth trap. So what you want to do is when you open the trap itself is have a little look inside all of these different pieces of egg boxes that we put inside the container. And you can see right in the nooks and crannies there, you'll see that the different species live inside. And if we have a look here, you should be able to see one. There you go, right in the center of that egg box there. This is a species we think is called the Uncertain Moth, which I love that name because I'm not sure if it's called this for this reason, but to me it's always because it's uncertain if you found it because it looks like a lot of different species. This moth species here is quite different. This is a very long, thin one, which we think is called a grass veneer moth. This is the Uncertain Moth, again, that I was talking about, a much different shape. So this, I wanted to show you how you approach the moth trap in the morning after you've done some trapping. We take off that little lid, which was just there to stop moths flying out before we started filming. Then you take off the lid of the moth trap itself to show the funnel and a lid of the actual moth trap. And you want to check that because sometimes, as you can see here, things are clinging to the underside. And we've got a riband wave moth to the right. They're quite broad and flat moth, which will fly off in a second. There you go. And then we have two other insects there. On the right, you have a white and speckled black spindle ermine moth. Very, very pretty. And on the left, you can see that's not a moth at all. That's actually a beetle. It's a darkling beetle. And so you'll get other things in your moth trap too, other insects that you'll be able to come and see. So you get a lot of different wildlife from using a moth trap. And we'll show you another bit of wildlife you can see in a moth trap as well. It's quite common. This is a daddy longlegs, nothing to be afraid of. But you can see it there, as well as a moth. Again, this is something related to an uncertain moth, similar to before that we saw. And yeah, you don't have to be afraid of these things. Do be careful though, sometimes you might get a wasp in your trap, so just be careful when you have a look at what's inside. This is a different type of insect. This is a mayfly, an adult mayfly. The nymphs live in water, but the adults live for a short time flying through the air, and one decided to visit our moth trap. And then this is a very different type of much simpler moth trap. This is just a white sheet we put up in our garden and we shined a bright torch on it. This is actually a torch from my bike. And then you can see here at the bottom of the trap, yes, we have a visitor which is attracted to the light and to the white sheet. Again, can you see it's got quite a broad shape? This is something similar again to that uncertain moth we found. So when you start moth trapping, looking for the overall shape and the family or group that the moth belongs to is much easier than looking for the species itself, because I'm not good enough to do that yet because I'm quite new to moth trapping. And what I wanted to do now, so this is an up-close shot of that species which did come to our sheet in the garden. I wanted to show you species that came to the back of our fence in the garden. It's also worth just taking a light round all areas of the garden, searching for what species are there, because as you turn around, the net trap is actually quite far away. So taking a torch around your garden is quite a good idea. So this is a Scalloped Oak Cloth, really quite beautiful, and it was just on the fence. And I want to show you now some pictures of different moth species we didn't film, but we did find in our garden. So this is a least coloured moth. Again, quite a different shape. It's got its wings out to its side. This is a beautiful moth. It's called a small blood vein moth. You can see it's got a sort of, looks like it does have a blood vein through the middle there. And we actually found this inside our house. It flew in to the light inside. This is a small magpie moth, very colourful, really very pretty. We were excited when that came into our moth trap. Looks very different. And this is a vines rustic. Remember, I saw the uncertain moth before. This is very closely related. This is one of my favourite moths. This is the snout moth, and you can see it does look like it's just got a massive nose, which is brilliant. So again, very excited when we found this. And the yellow-banded longhorn. It's got absolutely huge antennae, and this is a species of micro moth, I believe. And again, just really pretty, very colourful. I wanted to finish with another visitor we had, unexpected visitor to our moth trap. This was the first frog we've ever had in our garden. And we think it was attracted to all of the insects that were actually attracted to the light of the moth trap. And it was very happily jumping around, trying to chase after them as well. So lots of different wildlife you can see with a moth trap. And now I think I'm going to be answering your questions.
Yes, so thank you very much, Matt, for joining us here at a distance. I do have a few questions that didn't get answered yesterday, and also this is the chance for anyone else to start putting some questions into the chat on YouTube as well, if they have any. So, first question, do you have a favourite moth?
Ooh, yes, I think I do. Nets, who was on yesterday, did also mention it. It's something called the death's head hawkmoth, which is really, really cool. So the hawkmoths are the largest species of moth in this country. And my little budget moth trap hasn't actually attracted any yet. Fingers crossed it will. But I think the death's head hawkmoth is one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And it's called death's head because on its middle body segment, it has what looks like a picture of a skull on its back, which is just kind of super cool. It's a great insect for Halloween. And Nets mentioned yesterday that this insect actually raids beehives to steal their honey. So it's got amazing adaptations. It's a really large, impressive species. And it looks really, really cool. I've seen some museum specimens and they're very spectacular. So I would love to see one of those in the wild.
You haven't ever seen a death hawk?
I haven't seen one aside from in a museum collection. I haven't seen an alive one yet.
Would they be possible to trap in a moth trap like the moth trap?
Yes, they should be. As I said, they're quite large. So my bucket trap, I can show you actually. It's very simple. Really, as you can see, this is just the lid of a bucket here, and this is a funnel. And the thing that you'd have to there's actually, as I say, there's a moth on it right now. That's really quite surprising. I think that's a spindle ermine moth. Wow, okay. That wasn't planned. And so you can see here that this is the size, the bottom of the funnel, this is the size that the moths have to fall through. So you need to make sure that that hole is big enough for a large hawk moth to fall through. And Nets showed you yesterday, if you're watching, she has a really cool, impressive moth. A moth trap. I think it's called a Robinson moth trap. But if you go on butterfly conservation also protects moths as well, not just butterflies. They have a long list of different moth traps and different methods you can use. And also the Zoology Museum blog, we've done a post about our budget bucket moth trap we have here, which, as I say, is just a bucket lid with a funnel and a reptile lamp on top. So you can learn how to make one of those yourself. But there's lots of other things too, like using just a simple sheet trap that I showed on the video as well. Just a sheet with a torch, and things will get attracted to that. And just a light we've been finding in our house that if you just have a light on and a window open, things will fly inside. So there's lots of ways that you can find these hawk moths. Yeah.
Oh wow! So you trap these moths and then let them go in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we've had a few questions about whether moths make good pets.
So yeah, it's a good question as well about letting them go in the morning. We check them in the morning because obviously they get caught during the night, and you want to check them before it's really warm for them in that trap. So I think again, Net showed yesterday that actually she checked them a little bit later, but she had moved them to a safe spot in the shade. And ideally, if you can keep them in a safe place and then release them at dusk, that's really good as well, because that's when they would naturally be waking up, many of these species. Sorry, what was the other question?
Do they make good pets?
Do they make good pets? Again, with butterflies, it was similar. Really, if you want to keep one as a pet, I would suggest keeping a caterpillar or a pupae as a pet. So you can find them in your garden. We actually found this year, when we were doing some tidying up in our garden, in the leaf litter in spring. Be careful not to throw that leaf litter away, as a lot of caterpillars and pupae of moths will live in it. So we just made a big pile of leaves in our garden instead of throwing it away, so they still have a safe place to be. And then we did find 3 caterpillars though, and we made sure that we collected some of the food plants near them so they had something to eat. We put them in a little ventilated tank, and then a few weeks later they turned into a pupae. And about a month ago, they emerged into these beautiful yellow underwing moths, which we then released. So I wouldn't say don't really keep the adults, because they have wings and they naturally want to fly around, and you would constrict their natural behaviour if you kept them as pets. But if you had caterpillars, then they can feed up quite happily in a tank, pupae, and then you can release them as well, which is great fun.
Excellent. So speaking of butterflies as well as moths, we had a question yesterday that asked, why are butterflies and moths different colours?
Yeah, good question. So butterflies and moths use colour for a lot of different reasons. There's almost a stereotype that moths come out at night and are drab in colour, and butterflies come out during the day and are much more colourful. That's not strictly true, and Net's covered that as well yesterday, that there's actually about 3 times as many day-flying moths as there are butterflies in the UK, which I didn't know, which is an amazing fact. So there's more moths flying around in the day than there are butterflies. And a lot of these day-flying moths are also very colourful. That being said, you do obviously get a lot of moths at night as well, and they'll be hunkered down, resting during the day. So they have often quite woody colours to blend into their surroundings and into trees and branches and bark on trees and that sort of thing. But things like the yellow underwing moth, which we had the pupae of, they have this brilliant flash of colour on their underwings, on the underside of their wings. And they may use this as a signal. Often if you've got a bright colour, you might use that as a signal to attract a mate, or potentially as a defence mechanism for a predator, to ward off a predator. There's also things like eye spots, which are very recognisable on butterfly and moth wings as well. And it's thought that, as well as being a bit of a flash defence to make you look big with these big eye spots on your wings, they might also deflect a predator away from your head. If you're a predator, normally you would want to go to the head to make a killing blow. And normally the head is where your eyes are. But if you have eye spots on the back of your wings, then a predator might swoop in, take a little nip out of your wing, and then you could actually, as a moth, fly away quite happily, because you don't need all of your wings to be able to fly. So there's lots of different colours for lots of different reasons. It's very impressive.
Oh, thank you. So that you've almost answered that this next question for us already. But Eveline, age 7, asked, what is the most common moth in the UK?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I did actually try to look this up last night because I thought this might come through. But I did find, I just check my notes for you. I think there's the most common type of migrant moth that comes to our shores every year is, I believe, something called a silver Y moth. It's certainly a common migrant to the UK every year. And it's beautiful. The reason it's called a silver Y is because it does actually have on its wings this little silver Y mark. It does look like someone's written the letter Y on it. So yeah, out and about in a lot of this area, a lot of the country, you'll be able to see this this species. And I believe there's also a golden Y, which isn't quite as common. But I really like that kind of those kind of species where it's quite simple to name. You can be quite sure if you see a moth that has a silver Y on it, probably a silver Y. It's always nice, isn't it?
Yes, that leads us quite nicely on to Sinway's question. We had one from yesterday and also one from today. So Sinway lives in Singapore and asks, are moths diverse in the UK? So you've said that there are hundreds of species of moths
Yeah,
in the UK.
2,500 potentially.
Thousands,
Yeah.
Wow. She says that moths aren't particularly well studied in Singapore. Have you tried using a bucket moth trap in the tropics?
I haven't. No, I'd say I'm very new to all this. So I built our bucket moth trap a month ago now, maybe. So I've actually only tried it out in our garden relatively few times, maybe about 10 times. I'm sure there'll be people that have, but as you say, they are kind of more understudied than things like butterflies. Nets was talking yesterday about how, unfortunately, there was a report done where they looked into the popularity of moths, and far more people dislike moths than they dislike butterflies. I think because they have this association coming out at night, it being less obvious where they're flying. Often people have light around them or live in a house with light in, so moths will kind of fly at head height at them. I think it's important to remember that moths are just trying to navigate around and find food. They're not trying to fly at you. So if you can, think kindly towards them. And yeah, there's more and more research being done though, showing that moths are really important with things like pollination. So I'm sure more research will be done towards them. But yeah, they are understudied compared to butterflies.
Oh, thank you. We've got lots of questions coming in now. So Jack, aged 11, asked, is it okay to keep a sawfly caterpillar?
Yes, I believe so. So sawfly caterpillars are really interesting. They look very much like the larvae of butterflies and moths. They have a different number of little stubby legs called protolegs. So I believe I'm right in that a caterpillar and moth larvae will have, butterfly and moth caterpillars will have up to 5 protolegs, and any more than that, 6 or 7, it tends to be a sawfly. But if you saw one, a sawfly larvae, you would think it probably was a butterfly or a moth caterpillar. Yeah, I would have thought it would be okay. The same general rules would apply. If you find it on a specific food plant and would like to keep it as a pet, make sure that you have access to a lot of that food plant. If you take it home with you, it's important to make sure it's got a good supply of food. But if you can keep supplying it that food, it'll be probably quite happy munching away on that food plant in a ventilated chamber until it pupates, and then you can release the adult as well.
Thank you. So Noah, age 6, asked, what's the biggest moth in the UK?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I think this is one I mentioned before. There's a family of very large moths in the UK called the Hawkmoths, and there's quite a few beautiful species, and these have wingspans that are over 10 centimeters. So these are really large and beautiful moths, and I think the death's head hawkmoth is the biggest. Obviously, you get smaller and larger varieties of any species, but these ones also have a really chunky body, so I think they're probably like the heaviest as well. I'm not entirely sure, but I think the death's head is up there as probably being the biggest.
Thomas, age 5, asked, why are moths more active at night?
Yeah, so there are, as we mentioned, some day-flying moths, and there are also a lot of night-flying moths. So these night-flying moths have adapted to that environment, and that is an environment where they can survive quite well. There's not really a specific reason as to why these ones happen to be more active at night. It's just they've evolved over time. They've evolved to do better in these sort of environments. A lot of these night flying species will rely on very fragrant flowers which bloom at night as well. So basically they need to be around when their food source is available to them. So that'll be one of the reasons. But yeah, just over time, different species evolve to live in different environments, and some evolve to live during the day and some evolve to live during the night. And once you're set on that path, you do better in either day or night. So lots of the moths come out at night, kind of rely on nighttime to help them survive.
But generally, there just are a lot of moths.
That too, yeah. There's just a lot of moths, and butterflies are very similar to moths. Remember, and although they're day flying, there are lots of day flying moths too. So it's just there's a huge variety out there, and lots fly in the day. Lots of them also fly at night.
Cool. Tia Bell asks, why do moths eat clothes threads? That may be one of the reasons why people dislike moths.
Yes, well, I think they do often. That is one of the reasons. You're right that people do dislike moths. It's one of the ways that they can get their sustenance. As I say, I'm kind of new to moths, so I don't really know specifically why they always come in to eat woolly jumpers and that sort of thing. But remember, it's not them. It's not them trying to cause us difficulty. It'll be because they get sustenance from that food supply, and being in a cupboard or something like that in a house is a relatively safe place for them to hunker down as well. So it's a safe place for them to be. They're getting some resources that they need, and yeah, it's not because they're trying to annoy us. It's just because it's something that is useful to them.
So, as a off the back of that, as a museum professional, I know that some moths are really damaging to collections, especially natural history collections.
That's true.
And that will be because the pupae will use the fibres and bits of animal fur and things in our collection to create a cocoon. Is that similar to when they're using our clothes?
Well, certainly you do find them having pupated in amongst clothes as well, and so I imagine that would be the case. And again, it's a matter of finding a suitable habitat for them to pupate, which is safe for them to do so. So if there's a food supply for them and it's somewhere which is kind of dark and contained, because as we know, as we mentioned before, a lot of them like coming out at night in these conditions. If you imagine a sort of a cozy cupboard with lots of warm clothes in it, it sounds quite nice, really. I can see myself pupating there, to be honest. And
be one of those moths.
I'll be one of those moths, exactly. It's all to do, as we said before. So why do moths like coming out at night? Why do they like certain food plants? Over time, species evolve very specific niches and very specific habitats that they like to occupy. And it just so happens that these clothes are a perfect habitat for some of these moth species, and that's why they will live and pupate there as well.
So Ethan asks, are there any good ID books or guides to identifying moths that you would recommend for a beginner?
Yes, there are. So there's a lot of books you can buy, and we do have some of them, but I would suggest for a beginner using some of the free resources that are online, because there's loads of them. So I mentioned already, Butterfly Conservation. Although it's Butterfly Conservation, they are actually a charity that conserves moths as well as butterflies, because they're all very similar. And if you have a look, I think it's just called Identify a Moth on there, and you can actually type in what size it is, what color it is, what pattern, and it gives you a list of different moths that you might be able to find. It's also just got pages and pages of information about how you can search for moths in your garden, what time of year they come out, what food plants they like. So yes, you've got Butterfly Conservation. You've also got UK Moths you can look at, and a site that I found very useful for identifying species is Wildlife Insight. They've got some really good galleries of caterpillars as well, because they are quite tricky caterpillars. So yeah, I would suggest if you're just getting started, why not use what's freely available to you? And there's some really good content out there for free. So yeah, that's where I'd begin.
And all of those sites have really good images that you can use to compare.
Definitely, well. Yeah, that's a massive benefit. Because I say I'm starting out, so another good thing I can recommend is, yes, taking images of the species that you see and comparing them to what you see on these galleries online. But also, people like Nets, who were talking yesterday, the other more experienced moth experts that I've come across are always really friendly and very happy to give advice. So I would search out maybe your local moth recording group, and they're generally quite happy. If you want to send them a picture or have a question, they can help you identify moths. So in the video I gave you just a second ago, a lot of those IDs I got help with from Nets, who was talking yesterday, because I'm just starting out and I'm learning myself. So to check what I've seen or check an ID, yeah, it's good to talk to someone else who's been doing it a bit longer.
Cool. So just a couple more questions before we round off. On average, how long do moths live?
Yeah, so again, probably quite similar with butterflies, and it's something that Nets mentioned. Most will spend more time as a larva or a pupa, as a caterpillar or a pupae, before they turn into the adult. And the adult life stage is more concerned really with finding a mate and reproducing. And they're often a lot shorter lived, the adult moths that we see. So some will live a few days, some will live a few weeks. But as with butterflies, I'm sure it's very similar to moths. Some can overwinter as adults. And if you can overwinter and survive the winter as an adult, you obviously live for a longer amount of time as that adult moth. And so I would have thought probably in the UK up to about a year as an adult. But I did look this up because I thought this might get asked as well. I was looking for what is the longest lived moth. And I found not in the UK, but in Canada and Russia, there's a really cool species called an Arctic woolly bear moth. And these environments in Canada and Russia are extremely cold. And so it means that it can take a long time for a caterpillar to grow up and eat enough for it to then pupate and turn into an adult moth. And apparently this caterpillar can spend about 7 years growing in these really cold conditions, growing quite slowly before it eventually pupates and turns into an adult moth. So moths, yeah, quite variable. It depends how much food they have, what temperature it is. But in the UK, I would think around a year maximum, and then about a month or a few weeks is probably more normal for species.
Our last question for this segment is from Timothy, age 8. What do moths normally eat? And is there a way that we can help them?
Yes, so this is another good thing. If you want to go on to Butterfly Conservation, they have a great segment called Gardening for Moths, which is awesome. So moths are really important pollinators as well, where a lot of things like butterflies and bees get the press for being pollinators during the day, but there's a lot of pollination going on at night as well by moths. So they need flowers, and they need to visit nectaring flowers, and they really like, because when it's dark, obviously they don't rely on their sight as much to see flowers. They really like very fragrant flowers like honeysuckle and things like that, which bloom at night time, are really smelly and attract moths over to them. Butterfly Conservation, in their Gardening for Moths, they give a great list of different smelly flowering plants. And then the other thing that you can do to help moths is to help their caterpillars as well. So you can plant different plants in your garden that will be a food plant for the caterpillars and help the next life stage. I talked earlier in the week about nettles being great for butterfly caterpillars. Turns out there's also a few species of moth caterpillar that like nettles as well. So I'm still fighting the corner of nettles. They're a great plant to have in your garden, even though they sting. But again, look at Butterfly Conservation, their website, Gardening for Moths, and they have a full list of different food plants for the caterpillars too. So lots of information there for free for you to see.
I'm going to actually squeeze in one more question that's come in from Alex. Do moths have a main predator?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of them avoid the kind of daytime predation of birds and things that other day-flying insects have experienced. But we talked a little bit briefly yesterday about the fact that a lot of them are eaten by bats. And some species of bat can eat, I think, upwards of a few hundred moths a night. So that's definitely kind of one of the most famous predators they have at night time. And bats are astonishing because they feed via, they find their prey via echolocation. So they will release a signal, make a call, which will bounce off of a passing moth. And the way that those waves bounce back will tell the bat whereabouts the moth is, and it can track it down. But Nets was talking about some amazing moth adaptations yesterday, where some moths release their own signal, which confuses the rebounding signal of the bat. So it confuses the bat as to where the moth is. So yeah, but at night time, generally, it's bats that will eat a lot of moths.
Thank you very much, Matt. So you'll be back with us at 1 o'clock to do some beat netting.
That's right. Yep, lots of different insects there.
Thank you indeed. We will see you then.
Thanks very much, guys.
So big thank you to Matt there, and yeah, like I say, he'll be back at 1, but do join us at 12 o'clock as well, when we'll be joined by Dr. Ed Turner, who'll be showing us the results of his pitfall traps that he's been setting this week, and also answering any of your mini beast questions. So we look forward to seeing you then.